Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe.
We're back. Welcome to episode 35. That's right. It is episode 35 now. Today's episode is understanding. I don't understand. The last part was really pointless, but I thought it went really well with the title. So understanding, I don't understand. I don't know. But today we're really going to be examining understanding. In a much previous episode, well, not that much, I think a few episodes back, I'll have to look back and see which episode it was, we looked at the difference between knowing and understanding. So today's episode is really a deep dive in understanding. So I'm not sure at this point, there's a lot to go with it, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to fit it all in with today's episode. If not, we will make a part 2 of it. So that will all just kind of play out, and we'll play it by ear. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the segment wins and fails for the week. Okay, well, major fail. I was contemplating possibly working on new cover art for Time to Teach, and I really thought that during the break I would have it figured out. So I did kind of work on a couple of ideas, even had some of my family members vote on their favorite cover art, my poor family. But I still wasn't quite able to narrow it down even with the voting and whatnot. And then I just kind of stopped, and I still haven't figured out new cover art. So I don't know that I have advanced in the movement towards coming up with new cover art. So that was definitely a fail, and I don't know why I started with the fails. I usually start with the wins. So I guess I'm reversing things now that we're in 2018. Nope, I just started with that. I don't know why. Okay, so win. Yes, I have a major win after a major defeat. So I set a personal reading goal for myself for 2017. And unfortunately, I was 2 books away from this reading goal, and that just did not sit very well with me. So anyway, I just am even more determined to meet my reading goal in 2018. I took the same number as last year. It's a low number, by the way. I see some of these reading goals on Twitter, and I'm impressed. I am impressed. Mine's a low number, just because, I just thought I want to really get to consume more books. So I think I kind of do this in everything I do. I start slow and I build up, because I know if I set something, I'm going to work really hard for it and probably make it happen, because I'm going to make sure that it happens. And I just don't want to set myself a goal that's going to end up being more than I'm going to feel comfortable with. So on that note, even though I was defeated in 2017, I must say 2018 in January, and I've already completed 5, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books. So this is a major win for me. Now let me clarify what I mean by completed 5 books. I have not started and finished 5 books in 2018. 2 of these books I had started in 2017 and it carried over into 2018. So that's why I say completed. So you can't take that for a started in 2017, but I did carry over and finish it. And then so that was a beginning in 2017. And then of the remaining 3 books, one was an audiobook. So there might be some who argue audiobooks are not reading. If we are talking about semantics, it is not the act of reading, the physical act of I use my eyeballs and read words. But if we are talking about consuming literature and the activity that is involved, it's the same engagement. You're still comprehending and interacting with it. You're having to think about the content. You have to, depending on what you're, well, in most cases, analyze it, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. In this case, my audiobook was fiction. So it's a lot of very similar types of engagement. So it really depends on how you're defining reading. But I don't know. I guess we can use the word consumption. I have consumed 5 books, completed the consumption. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore, but that's a win for me. So I'm going to carry on. I'm highly motivated by my defeat by last year. I just, that was a big blow to me. And I knew it was going to happen. I knew as January was coming very close, and I saw how not too far away I was from my goal, but far enough that it really wasn't going to happen. I started to already think about, okay, how can I make this work for next year? So big win for me. Okay, well, before we go ahead and get into today's material, I just want to say welcome to all of you. I feel like this podcast has been on winter recess for quite some time, I guess because it has been on winter recess for quite some time. But so it's really nice to be back. It's really just, it feels really good to be able to publish another show. Not that I wasn't able to before, but as I had explained, just with the holiday season and the different schedule and being in and out of the city, going here, going there, my schedule was not one that was real conducive to making sure I had a recording that was edited and published ready on my normal schedule, which would have been Sunday. So that's why I went ahead and went on the winter recess, but we are back. So I'm so excited, and thank you for joining in. If this is your first time, thank you so much for choosing Time to Teach as part of your podcast listening. I understand that, we have so many different options when it comes to ways that we can spend our time and energy, and the fact that you choose to be here and listen in, I am very grateful for. And hey, that's not just if you're new, that's for anybody. Long-time listeners, long time as of, I only started, last May, so we're not that long-term, but those who have been listening since the beginning or sometime after, thank you. All right. So, so let's go ahead and dive into understanding. I just want to briefly mention again in the episode where we did talk about knowing versus understanding. Recap, knowledge is really more just like a very surface level idea of a concept or information. It's more, so I have a piece of information, I know something. So there aren't many different layers when it comes to knowledge. And please understand that even though I say surface level, that does not mean that it's not important. We need surface level before we can dig deeper. We have to reach the surface. We have to make contact with the surface. But the goal really is to go much deeper beyond the surface. So that's really where understanding comes in. When we talk about understanding, there are different depths. There is a complexity when it comes to understanding. So when we understand something, we can use this understanding in different contexts. We can apply it in different ways. We can make connections where maybe it would not be obvious to someone else, but because of our level of understanding, it is possible to do such. And that we can kind of see the unseen. So by that, I just mean that, we can kind of, because we have this deeper understanding, we can see things that are maybe not very obvious, and it takes some real insight. So that is the basic summary of knowledge versus understanding. I would go back and listen to that episode. I will include it in the show notes, but that's basically the summary of it. So let's look at now that we know that understanding really is our goal, let's look at that. So in order for us to look at this, there's a lot of looking going on. I am looking at Grant Wiggins and J. McTighe's Understanding by Design book. This is edition 2, the second expanded edition. I've had this for many, many years. Love it. Okay, so I just kind of want to open up with the way they open up their chapter, because I really loved every chapter. If you're not familiar with the book, they open up with a different quote, and it really gets you to really think about the ideas that will be in that chapter, and I love the way they did this. So I'm going to share. So here we are, beginning of chapter 4. This is entitled The 6 Facets of Understanding. Okay, first quote: there are many different ways of understanding, overlapping but not reducible to one another, and correspondingly many different ways of teaching to understand. And that comes from John Passmore of the Philosophy of Teaching back in 1982, page 210. Okay, and then brilliant, they bring in Shakespeare. Okay, Lance. What a block art thou, that thou canst not. My staff understands me. Speed. What thou sayest? Lounce. Aye, and what I do too. Look thee, I'll but lean, and my staff understands me. Speed. It stands under thee, indeed. Lounce. Why, stand under and understand is all one. And this is coming from Shakespeare's The Two Gentlemen of Verona. So I kind of liked the way that they opened that, because it shows you how understanding, there are different depths of understanding, there really is. And in the last one, that's kind of humorous, I think. There are different interpretations too, right? And certain things have different meanings depending on the context in which it's used. So I really like the way they highlighted that with the quote from Shakespeare. Okay, so we look at understanding. Yes, absolutely. There are different ways that we could attach meaning to the word understanding. And there are different definitions. Just to kind of explain a little bit the way that the book itself explains it, it says, in terms of synonyms for the noun form of the word, we talk about insight and wisdom, both clearly different from, yet somehow related to, knowledge. So I really think those two terms define understanding in probably the most powerful way. Insight, wisdom. When we hear those terms, we know that there is a depth to it, and it almost takes on like a seasoned connotation, that there's been there's really been time invested in this concept. So I really love the way that they define that, because I think that makes it very clear. So according to Wiggins and McTighe, they've kind of put 6 different facets that are attached to understanding. So I'm just going to kind of go into a little bit of those facets. So facet 1 is explanation. Okay, so a student is able to explain, perhaps it is a theory, perhaps it is an illustration. They're able to explain and give more information about an event, an action, and or perhaps an idea. It means that they have understood the main concepts of whatever it is that they have seen or witnessed or partook in. So some of the examples that the book itself gives that is that an explanation would be why is that so? What explains such events? What accounts for such action? How can we prove it? To what is this connected? What is an illustrative example? How does this work? And what is implied? So to be able to explain something clearly, you're going to need to have obviously the surface level information, but also a little bit deeper, because this is going into connections and really understanding the intent, and even how to prove that it might be true, or how to show such a thing. So here are some actual more context level examples. A cook explains why adding a little mustard to oil and vinegar enables them to mix. So someone would have to understand that the mustard acts as an emulsifier. A 9th grade physics student provides a well-argued account of why the car on the air track accelerates the way it does when the incline of the roadway is varied. Okay, so these are different examples of what would go into an explanation. What's really implied in there is that the student really gets why something happens or how something happens. Also, that the student is going to be able to support those ideas, right? Or support opinions. If the student has come to a specific opinion, they can support it, they can find evidence for it, and they can explain. So it's going beyond the surface level, because surface level would just really be facts, right? And this is requiring that the student is really going to have to think a little more critically about those facts and come to a conclusion. Okay, facet number 2 is interpretation. So by interpretation, they don't mean like a literal translation and interpret something in another language. That's not what it means. It's really more of ascribing meaning and patterns to different things, like to events, experiences, or data and information. And the other important thing that the book really stresses when it's talking about these different meanings when we are interpreting, because it could be, remember, an interpretation, it could be, is this a story that I'm listening to? Is this an event that now I have to interpret what exactly does this mean? Or maybe it's an archaeological finding, and someone has to interpret, what maybe some of what the events were. What does that mean? Or what could this mean? So there could be some, having to connect the dots to it. So it's really kind of looking at what's there and making a lot of connections. To kind of quote a little bit from the book, I'm looking at page 91. It says, when interpreting, students move between the text and their own experience to find legitimate but varying interpretations, as noted. And the interpretive realm, unlike the realm of scientific explanation, it is not only acceptable but likely that different understandings of the same text, which could be the book, event, or experience, will be proposed. Indeed, modern literary criticism has been enlivened by the idea that even the author's view is privileged, that regardless of author intent, text can have unintended meanings and significance. A text or a speaker's words will always have different valid readings. All interpretations are bound by the personal, social, cultural, and historical context in which they arise. So it's really, you have these different lenses through which you can examine whatever it is you're examining, the event or the thing, the story. You're going to look at it, and it also was probably produced and happened with its own, within its own context that might not be so evident if we go back to the hypothetical archaeological finding. You have to make sense of what that is, what time period, what is it, why was this being used, and taking what but through a very critical and somewhat narrow lens, and having to try to broaden that lens by digging a little bit deeper. So there's really going to have to be involved some insight, absolutely some insight, and then kind of connecting things by seeing what isn't seen. So some examples that the book gives of this is example 1. And this is on page 88. A grandfather tells stories about the Depression to illustrate the importance of saving for a rainy day. So that was able to use a story to really illustrate a certain idea or concept. Okay, example 2. A college freshman shows how Gulliver's Travels can be read as a satire on British intellectual life. It's not just a fairy tale. And then the non-example that they give is one that I shared as I opened up this facet, is just a middle school student can translate all the words, but does not grasp the meaning of a Spanish sentence. Boy, I feel like sometimes that happens to me when you hear, a phrase or something that's used a lot, and you understand the literal words, but trying to understand its significance sometimes can be, very difficult. So that is a non-example, because this is really going beyond that. It's ascribing different meaning and significance, and really using really the experience of the person who is making those interpretations, and having to look at all the evidence around him or her. So then, just to kind of conclude that facet, it basically, the book goes on to talk about the ways that we can use interpretation, or what things would you use to interpret. They suggest things such as you might use historical interviews. You might develop mathematical conclusion by using messy data. You might create an artistic interpretation subject to peer review based on a careful reading, and then not only make meaning of whatever this is, the reading that they're doing, or whatever it is that they're examining, not just make sense of it, but then for purposes of interpretation, attach a deeper significance to it so that they can understand what are the implications of that. So then what does that mean? So when I think about when they talk about the examining of data to make sense of that, a few times a year we kind of look, we in our grade level will look at, say, like benchmark data, mid-year data, where we can like measure growth from the beginning to the middle of the year and look at the data across our whole grade level. So I'm looking at, let's throw math in there as an example. I'm looking at the scores from my class. We're all looking at this together, and then all the other classes, and just kind of looking at what are the trends, what do we notice, questions that we have, and we have an actual protocol to go through it and eventually make sense of it, and then so that we can then set an action plan in place to do something with that data. Was there something that worked? If we see a trend of students having difficulty in a certain area or with a certain concept, what could have been those reasons and how can we change that? So it's really, you're looking at these facts, or you're looking at this thing. In this case, it's this data that came out of a benchmark, and you have to make sense of it, but not just make sense of it, looking at the evidence right there, but in terms of, okay, but what are the implications of this? What could this mean, and why did it happen, and what can we do differently? So it's pretty heavy work, and it requires, there's a little bit of ambiguity to it and perhaps uncertainty, but it's not like just taking a wild guess in the dark. You're really having to look at evidence and taking in what the things that you know and understand. And so that also implies that there should be a solid understanding or knowledge before you go into it. So just to take my same example, let's say another grade level looks at the data that comes out of my grade level's benchmark. They don't have the background knowledge to be able to actually make assumptions and interpret the whys of what happened, and even maybe the next steps, because they lack that knowledge. They simply lack that knowledge. They haven't taught it. They don't know, all the things that we know. They don't know the students. They don't know, are there learning issues? Is this a concept that we have always found difficult with our second language learners? So is it something particular to our student population? They might have actually some knowledge of that, because obviously we have the same student knowledge, or the same student population. But in terms of grade level, sometimes that's a little more specific. So you see where you would have to have some knowledge. I can better make decisions about what could have gone wrong when I know what the learning looked like, what did the teaching look like, what were the learning experiences like. So you have to have some of that background knowledge to be able to really interpret very well. Okay, and then to just end with Facet 3, so as we can see, this is now very evident to me that we'll only make it halfway through. So next week we will do a part 2 of understanding I don't understand. So Facet 3 is application. So application they define as ability to use knowledge effectively and in new situations and diverse realistic contexts. So again, they have a couple other quotes, so I'll include that because I do like those. By understanding, I mean simply a sufficient grasp of concepts, principles, or skills that one can bring them to bear on new problems and situations, deciding in which ways one's present competencies can suffice and in which ways one may require new skills or knowledge. So that comes from Howard Gardner from The Unschooled Mind in 1991, page 18. And then an anonymous quote, you're going to love this: use it or lose it. Okay, so when we talk about application, it's really knowing when something is appropriate. As they say, the how and the where. How do you use it? How and where do you use the knowledge, the skill, or the process? So really knowing when it's appropriate, and like, is this maybe the best strategies or something better? How should my thinking and action be modified to meet the demands of this particular situation? So some examples of this would include: a young couple uses their knowledge of economics, the power of compound interest, and the high cost of credit cards to develop an effective financial plan for saving and investing. So they've then used this concept and applied it in their life. So used it out of context in which they probably a much different context than they probably learned it in, but was able to apply it in a situation that would be fitting and appropriate, and very useful for them. Okay, another second example: 7th grade students use their knowledge and of statistics to accurately project next year's costs and needs for the student-run candy and supply store. And then a non-example: a physics professor cannot diagnose and fix a broken lamp. So basically, to understand, it's to be able to use this knowledge that you have. And I'm going to read a little excerpt here in the book. This is on page 93. It says, "This is an old idea in U.S. education, indeed an old idea in the long tradition of U.S. pragmatism and cultural disdain for ivory tower academic thinking. We say to young and old alike, you need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk." So we can see how it's different than just like a surface level knowledge. I mean, it's really having this, well, yes, it involves knowledge. You know something, you have the knowledge of something, but also you're able to see where that can be applied and used in, something that is of a different context. So if you really have the understanding of something, you would be able to use it in a different context. Whereas if you just have the knowledge of something, and you don't have a deep understanding, it's going to be more complicated and difficult to apply it in another area, because perhaps you don't see even that the application would be appropriate or useful in that situation. To share with you a very wonderful quote still on page 93. I think this is coming from the book, and it really makes it very clear what they mean by application. So it says, "We show our understanding of something by using it, adapting it, and customizing it. When we must negotiate different constraints, social contexts, purposes, and audiences, we reveal our understanding as performance know-how, the ability to accomplish tasks successfully with grace under pressure and with tact." And this is looking at the level and the depth of application. This is something that we're really kind of working on in terms of at my section, the elementary section at my school. We have revamped our report cards. It's been 2 years now, I think. Is this the third year? Gosh, I don't know. Is this only the second year? Maybe. I don't know. Time goes by so fast, I can't even keep up. But we have been revamping it because we are now standards based, and which is wonderful. But it has been a process, and it has been it has definitely involved learning and kind of, coming up to little bumps in the road and fixing things. So it's been a work in progress, and we're also currently, we're using a scoring system. So each standard gets scored 1 to 4. And we've really had to work on the language of these scores. Basically, 3 would be, you're meeting those you're meeting grade level expectations basically. But of course you have to agree on what are grade level expectations. But where we are still trying to work on truly understanding ourselves and making this really work is the indicator for number 4, which has been reworded, and now I can't quote completely, but it's something like exceeds expectations or exceeds grade level expectations. And we have said we have to be very careful that we're not saying that means that we're showing above grade level expectations, because that's, perhaps the student has not even been given a chance to demonstrate on a advanced grade level strand. So these are the conversations that we have to talk about. Okay, so what does exceeding actually mean? We don't believe that it means the speed and rate at which a student might meet that, because we say, well, maybe a student might be a fast learner, but is that really exceeding? If the goal is for mastery at the end, and someone has shown mastery earlier, that's not really showing that they exceeded mastery. So with that discussion came, well, then the implication of that is we really need to look at the depth and what different contexts that the student can really demonstrate like a much deeper understanding. And that's where we feel like in areas such as writing and reading, it's very easy to see that. It's very easy, especially since at our school we use a workshop model. So a student reads up to his or her independent level. That's based on the student. So we have expectations at our grade, so you can very easily measure if a student has exceeded that expectation. Right now in January, they're expected to be at a level A. So if a student is reading at a level B, he or she is exceeding the expectations. That would be a 4. That's easy in writing as well. Our students come in as non-writers. So let's say a student who came in actually writing would be exceeding my expectation at that point of the school year. So those are very easy to measure and to give opportunity in the class to even strengthen and deepen on those strands. But where we are finding is perhaps more challenging would be making sure that students in math and the math workshop, that they have opportunities to reach and demonstrate a deeper understanding of the strands. And that's where we're not sure that we're all doing that. And also because, we have time constraints, and we have certain, we know we're educators, right? I don't have to explain it. Those things exist. And we need to figure out a way. That's our problem that we need to problem solve. We need to figure a way of, surpassing and really not surpassing, but I'd say tearing down those walls and overcoming those obstacles, because we have to do that for our kids, not just to be able to better understand a 4, but just because they deserve that. It has nothing really to do with the indicator for 4. But so those are the different things that we're really looking at when we're talking about application. Okay, you guys, I think on that we are going to wrap it up. We only got through 3 of the 6 facets, so we will finish that up next time. Just to wrap up, the 3 facets that we discussed today was facet number 1 was explanation, facet number 2 interpretation, and facet number 3 application. So listeners, I challenge you to take one of those facets and intentionally try to use it in your class. Now, I know we all use these. I'm not saying we don't. We're always getting kids to explain and to interpret and apply, but I mean an intentional design, intentionally thinking, how can I improve in this area? Would you take on that challenge and I will as well, and maybe we can report back next week. I'd love to hear how you're taking on this challenge. What are you doing? Which facet? How are you doing? And what are the results? So have fun with that challenge. I will have fun with that challenge, and let me know about it. You can tweet to me. My Twitter handle is @Tammy. That's TAMIJ123. @Tammy with an I, J123. I'll see you next time.
Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's LIBSYN.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who Podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.